Good afternoon. Sorry for the short delay. It always takes a little bit extra time to get everybody situated when we're starting on with the virtual meetings. But welcome to the July 28th, 2021 meeting of the Raleigh Council Study Group. As always, we want to review the minutes of the last meeting, which was July 14th, and find out if anybody has any amendments, corrections, additions. We appreciate the detailed minutes. We had a lot of discussion, so that was helpful. Thanks, Harvey.
This is Weeks. I make a motion that we approve our July 14th, 2021 meeting.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, I heard a couple. I'm going to go with Ashton. She made the second. So you have a motion to approve the July 14th, 2021 minutes. We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, minutes are approved. So we will also go ahead and just briefly review the outcome of the last meeting. Essentially, in terms of voter engagement, I'm not going to go through all the recommendations, but essentially, and the group can correct me if I'm overstating it, but we essentially want to recommend that the city make voter engagement one of their primary community engagement activities or focuses in the future, and that would entail using the Gov delivery, their email system, to distribute voter information, prepare a voter guide, and distribute that both on hard copy and electronically. That's similar to what the judicial voter guide was, just an objective opportunity for each elected or candidate or each candidate for council to provide a limited amount of information about their position, and then that would be distributed. We also recommended, and I think I've generally said this, but that the city manager should, assuming the council adopts our recommendations, city manager should make voter engagement a priority and decide where it should be housed within the city administration. It seems appropriate to put it in the new Department of Community Engagement, but obviously that's a city manager decision, and that department is very new. So it's really not our job or council to tell the manager how to structure their the city administration. But I think it's clear that we as a group want the city to make voter engagement a priority. Some other things we talked about was to continue fair, free transportation. I know they've extended that for the city due to the pandemic. If it doesn't continue citywide permanently, then at least for election day, we think that should continue to be a priority. And I think also I had some recommendations from folks individually after the meeting, and one of them was to consider using the Raleigh buses, Go Raleigh buses, for advertising the election, and the city's also considering installing informational kiosks, and those might be another way to, at the appropriate time, handle voter engagement, voter information. And so doing kind of a catch-all that, that we ask council to, continue considering how to handle voter engagement. I think that would be, kind of fit into the overall recommendations that we're going to make, because information and opportunities to inform voters are going to change over time. We don't know exactly what's going to come about. And so we just want to recommend that council really make this a priority. Are there other suggestions? Oh, sorry. The other one was to use the monthly utility billing newsletters and the Parks and Rec newsletters as another tool for disseminating voter information. So that's what I have. I think those were all listed in the minutes from the last meeting and the June 23rd meeting, I think. And there, Harvey, I just remembered, I think there was a typo. I think you said in the minutes June 28th meeting, and I think it was actually the June 23rd meeting. We didn't have a June 28th meeting. Anyway, but do others have, did I miss anything else we want to add on that topic? It's not our primary topic today, but it's certainly, if folks have other thoughts or anything came up while after the meeting, let me know.
If I might, Eric, in reading the report on citizen engagement in general, the one that was shipped out, there seems to be an effort there by the city to make the concept of citizen engagement sort of endemic to every department's thinking. It would seem to me that voter engagement, likewise, if they're able to create that kind of relationship and culture within the organization, picking back the voter engagement specifically might be a good thing to sort of plug in as they go through the process.
Yeah, and I think that's, I probably wasn't articulate enough. I'm sure I wasn't, but that's kind of, I think our overarching, or should be our overarching recommendation to council is that historically, at least from what I recall, voter information and voter engagement hasn't been a priority of the city. It's kind of been a priority of the county. And so I think that one of our kind of overarching recommendations is that this should be a priority to the city. I mean, fundamentally, citizen engagement, it comes down to voting. And if we're going to make citizen engagement a priority, then it seems to me that voter engagement is should be a primary component of community engagement overall. And so I think all of these specific recommendations we have fit into that, and it should become, I think, just part of their thinking. You know, as elections come up and those types of things, there should kind of be hopefully it's a given that, hey, elections are approaching, we're going to do these X, Y, and Z things to inform voters and try to get more folks out to vote. And I think we've recognized that voter turnout in sheer numbers, now that the council elections have been shifted to even years, raw turnout probably is going to increase significantly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that voters are informed, you know, on local topics. And so again, I think that we hope that the city will make that a priority so that those additional people that are going to vote hopefully will be informed about the local issues and council candidates and as they vote and aren't just, you know, pulling a lever for a candidate without much knowledge or information. And that's the same with bonds and anything else that Raleigh would control in terms of voting. So I'll try to, in the report, I'll try to articulate that. And again, everybody will get a crack at that as well. So I'm sure there'll be additional input to help me get that where everybody feels comfortable. Anything else that you may have thought of or that I might not have covered appropriately? Okay, then I'm going to move on to the topic of the day, which is council expansion, and hopefully we'll get a final recommendation. I want to correct something and then just provide some additional information that I got from staff. In the interim report, and it's my error, I had put that in the intro part that the city in 1972 was 47 square miles, and it has expanded to 211 miles. I got that from the internet. It apparently is incorrect. I got information from the city. I was asking something else, but they provided information, and if my conversion that I got off the internet is correct, the city is actually 147 square miles, not 211. I don't think it fundamentally changes the point that we were making or I was trying to make, but there was an error. And so I'm going to correct that, of course, in the report. But a couple of other things that I just wanted to point out in terms of size, just to give people a sense of scale. Currently, we know that the city is about approximately 147 square miles. The districts, for your information, District A is, and the city gave me acres, and I used a conversion tool on the internet, so I assume it's accurate. District A is about 17,000 acres, which is 26.5 square miles. And so the districts are relatively the same size, but they've changed over time due to annexations. And so they'll get rebalanced when the census is done as well, both, I guess, population wise, and that'll adjust the size. District B was 16,949 acres, which is 26.48 square miles. District C is 19,728 acres, which is about 30.82 square miles. District D is 18,441 acres, which is about 28.81 square miles. And then District E is 23,201 acres, which is about 36.25 square miles. And then the city can grow in its current annexation area with where they think they will extend public utilities. That equates to another 63 square miles. Potentially, it doesn't mean it's going to happen. Would be in the longer term for all of that area to be brought into the city limits. But to just give you an idea, so 63 square miles, if you divide that by the current 5 districts, it would add 12.6 square miles per district. If you go to 6 districts, which would be 9 council members, it would be adding about 10.5 square miles per district. And that's just obviously pure land area. It doesn't have any relationship to population. And so, depending on which districts are more dense in population, that obviously means the physical district size could be smaller. But I just wanted to provide that information for scale. I don't know whether it changes anyone's thinking, but it was interesting to me, and I did want to make that correction. I don't know how I got that wrong, but I did. So,
based on what you said, if you had 147 square miles and you have the ETJ or whatever they call it is another 63 miles, that gets you to 211. So they may have been counting the whole enchilada.
Oh, that's a good, yeah. So and the 211 didn't come from a city resource. I did not realize, for those that are interested, and this is 2019 data, but the city has something called the Raleigh Data Book, which I had never heard of. And I'll send a link, Harvey. We can put it in the minutes, but it basically has, all kinds of information about the city and zoning cases and, just it's, as it's titled, it's the Raleigh Data Book. And I don't know how often it gets updated, but it's pretty interesting. Councilor Weeks, yes, sir.
Yes, would you mind restating the numbers for District C and the miles, please?
Yes, District C is 30.82 square miles. And obviously that's an approximation, but.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so anyway, that's some of the physical area. And I think the group, and again, we've just kind of generally slowly moved into these areas where we've reached consensus. Generally, I think we landed on 9 council members total would be a good number because it would be odd. And our prior discussions, we decided that we thought landing on an odd number was the best approach. Obviously, that means 9 or 11 because you can only have 12 under North Carolina law. And then our additional discussions, we seem to be coalescing around 9. But we didn't really, I don't think we came down on at-large versus district. My general sense was that the group was leaning towards district, adding a district representative versus an at-large. That would mean that we would have 6 district representatives versus 5, and then the 2 at-large, and then the mayor obviously is elected by the city as a whole. So that is, I think, where we were and where we left it. And I wanted to just, again, open it up. My initial thinking was 9 and adding the additional representative would be at large. My kind of general concern, and I don't know the right answer to it, I don't want us to lose, I don't want a council in theory to lose focus on the bigger picture versus getting tied up to hyper local issues like one controversial zoning case. One of the things that I think, Harvey, you brought up that could mitigate against that is how the districts are drawn, which I hadn't really thought about. If my sense initially was draw the districts as tightly and as compact as possible. And then you would get more homogeneous citizens in that district. But Harvey brought up a point that could lead to, and if I'm misstating the point, Harvey, correct me, that could lead to more parochial interest, I guess, that, for just that limited area of the city. And as they're drawn today, the districts kind of reach across geographic areas. So I'm in District E, and that's the one I kind of recognize the best. I don't have the map in front of me, but it goes from just inside the Beltline all the way to Briar Creek. And so it crosses, lots of different neighborhoods and economic, I think socioeconomic backgrounds as you do that. Robin, what's it districts? Is it District B? That's Councilor Cox's district, right? B. And his is similar, that goes up, Capitol. I don't know where it ends, but it's close to downtown, and then it goes all the way up to Wakefield area and that area. So again, it crosses lots of different socioeconomic, I think, areas as well. And so that, I think, mitigates against the concern that I have, which was if you have really heterogeneous districts, they're less likely, counselors aren't necessarily going to be pigeonholed into, really narrow interests potentially. There'll be more balance of interests across the districts. Obviously, we can't dictate how council draws the districts and their legal implications to how they have to be drawn. But I think we can certainly include something like that in the recommendation to the extent anybody finds that interesting. So I think if I get comfortable that that is possible, I'm okay with having a district representative and that's how we get to 9. But of course, I want to open it up to everybody else. I don't want to dominate this at all by any stretch. So I'd love to hear from others on what their thoughts are. Anyone? I mean,
I'll get it started, and then you might just have to call on people, Eric.
Yeah.
So I had a similar thinking about the at large, but to the point that I get some feedback, and we have gotten feedback from some of the citizen input, is that they feel that the district players are having to cover too much territory. I don't think we were able to outrun that, but if we can ameliorate it to some point, then a district representative is okay for me. Getting to an odd number and a little broader district representation seems like a good balance.
Councilor Weeks.
Yes, I agree with Harvey on that, that we go. I'm looking at your numbers that you just presented to us. And if we look at the growth that is going on in the city of Raleigh, I think a district more representative more than at large would probably be the feasible way that we could go and try to help out with our single district that individual is in, and maybe pick up, really you'll be surprised that even when we talk about voter get out, even with that, that will almost on its own will increase the voter get out in certain districts. And so I go along with what Harvey just stated.
One other thought I had, and I don't know the legalities of this, but I was reading some of the other information about other councils in the state, and Fayetteville was, I don't know the history, but they made a statement on their website. They were subject to the Voting Rights Act prior authorization or whatever the review is required. And I know that's all changed because of the Supreme Court and everything. But what I found interesting is on their website talking about it, they specifically said that, I can't remember the number of districts they have. I have it right here. So Fayetteville has a total of, their council size is a total of 10. They have 9 district representatives, and they specifically said that they've drawn 4 of them with the intent of having minority representation elected in those districts. And so, again, I don't know what the law is on this. I'm just putting it out there. One thing that could happen, I guess, is if we agree to add a district and council agrees, there could be an effort to draw the districts such that, there would be a higher probability to have a minority representation elected in more than one district, because that's essentially what happens now. And so that's another possibility. And I just found it interesting that Fayetteville states it on their website. But again, I don't know what the actual law is with that. And so I'm if there's something inappropriate about it or not, that we can't do legally, then please forgive me but I'm not an expert in that area. Catherine, I know at last meeting you had some, I think you had some, or you did have some thoughts about it. And I think you were interested in district versus at large?
Mhm. Yeah, so I agree with what seems to be the emerging consensus. I'm strongly in favor of adding a district seat instead of an at-large. I think that that's the overwhelming consensus that I've been hearing from community members, that that's the preference. I think that with all of the changes and the growth that Raleigh is going through, I think that having people who directly represent on a representative body the interests of their community and also carry the responsibility of explaining to their community why the council is making decisions it makes, why growth and movement and change are happening the way they're happening is a good thing. I just think that that kind of more direct local accountability and leadership is preferable. I mean, and that's just part of my own bias. I prefer an added district seat. As a quick point on all of the discussion around district drawing, I am very reticent for us to include in our recommendation to council anything touching factors to consider or outcome determinative goals when it comes to drawing districts, just because the legal landscape is moving a lot right now. And there's a lot of litigation and there's a lot of pending legislation, both at the state level and in the federal level. And I would hate for us to weigh in on something that is a captured moment in time for a legal landscape that is moving so very, very quickly, especially when, you know, that's, to my knowledge, none of us here are actually election attorneys. I mean, I see that Jerry's listening in as always, and I know many election attorneys. I have so much respect for what they do, and the fact that that is an expertise that is incredibly important. It's incredibly complicated. So I do want to just kind of say I'm very hesitant about us putting any particular recommendation in on that front.
Well, I certainly would defer. You know more about it than I do. I'm no expert. I know you have some, I think you have some experience in that. So I just threw that out there as a consideration, but I certainly am not wedded to it by any stretch. And like I did qualify it, I do not know what the law is. And I certainly don't want to, I would defer to the experts on it, and certainly don't want us to make a recommendation about something that we're not supposed to do, not legal, or doesn't make sense. So how about others? Nirvana, do you have thoughts on it?
I don't, and believe it or not, I'm sitting here like weighing the pros and cons of having, you know, an at-large versus a permanent, you know, just seat in a specific area, and I'm torn. So I'm gonna just navigate through that before I come back with a comment.
Okay, well, that's okay. Robbie?
Yeah, I'm similar in that I'm not have a strong pull either way. I'll say I had some of the same concerns as Eric around trying to keep the council focused on the big picture. But it seems like there's some ways to mitigate that even with a district seat. And I will say, from talking to people back in the last election, 2019, it did seem like most of the public was talking about trying to add another district seat, not another at-large seat. So there seemed to be some consensus around that. And even if we don't make a recommendation specifically about how to draw new council lines, I will say there are some strange divisions right now where certain neighborhoods are split into different districts that could probably be corrected. I think the biggest glaring error, in my opinion, is that downtown is pretty much split directly in half when it comes to district representation. And it seems like you could make some more cohesive lines in some of those areas.
Well, that's one indirect benefit, I guess, to if we, assuming we make a recommendation to add a district and assuming council adopts that, that kind of forces the significant redrawing of the districts, however they want to do it, because you've got to stick another one in there versus if we didn't make any recommendation, or if we suggested an at-large, it's a little bit easier to just kind of rebalance the districts as they are, which is, I think, kind of what they do and have done in the past. But again, as Catherine said, the legal landscape is shifting. And so I don't know what they might even be required to do now versus before. I think I agree that we shouldn't get into telling the city how to do the districting and what's appropriate and what's not, because certainly we don't have that expertise right now. So other comments? I see Beth stepped away for a minute. Yes, Council Weeks, go ahead.
Can we get comments from Gary on this discussion? I see he is joining us.
If he
Maybe this will lead us in some directions.
if he has comments, Jerry, do you want to make a comment?
Are we talking about the voting rights issue from earlier, or what exactly was the question?
I think just generally we were talking about the idea of districting and, what are the, what can we do? What should we do? I know you can't tell us what we should do. But in terms of, I guess the point I made, and again, I'm not suggesting we have to make this recommendation, but I saw that in Fayetteville, they actually, at least on their website, targeted several districts to have minority representation or increase the likelihood of that a minority would be elected in certain districts. And I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that or can weigh in on it.
Back prior to 2013, when Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was in effect, requiring pre-clearance, Cumberland County was under that, Wake wasn't. So Fayetteville City Council had to get their plans approved by the U.S. Justice Department. That's no longer in effect, but there are still, of course, voting rights issues that still are potentially out there. But unlike Fayetteville, when it went to districts in the late 80s, it doesn't have to be approved by the Justice Department anymore. So I think that's sort of a leftover on their website, which was true in their 2011 redistricting when they had to comply with that.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's the council's, the law is clear. It's the city council's responsibility to adopt a district plan, whether it's for 5 districts or 6 or whatever.
Okay, and that obviously is there are legal implications and legal requirements, but it's a council discretion issue, it sounds like. So, it's probably appropriate, as Catherine suggested, that we don't tell them how to do that job, other than recommending that they potentially add a council member in district. So, all right, thank you.
Eric, if I might, I think what we're saying is that the market is growing. We need representation gets filtered when you've got more people and less counselors. So if we can add another district representative, it gives a little better access for the voters, and sort of leave it at that. And the fact that we think an odd number is better than an even number, and that we ought to go to an odd number so that we can get action done. I mean, those are, I think, our 2 big rationales for taking this action. And Beth is back.
Hey, Beth, I just wanted your thoughts on this. I think you're the only, we still have Ashton too, but do you have any thoughts, suggestions, comments on the district versus at large and ation?
I think I'm kind of in line with everybody else. My initial thought was that, an at-large seat was the way to go, that it made sense to have someone who was looking at the broader picture for the city. But I'm certainly open to considering, the thoughts of the group.
Ashton, how about you? What are your thoughts? She's disappeared, so hopefully she'll be back. Well, I hope today that we can bring this to a close. Nirvana, I know you sounded like you weren't quite ready to come down on one side or the other. But we do have to make a decision at some point, one way or the other, or not. As I've said all along, I think our operating kind of posture has been that, I personally think that we need to be unified in our recommendation to the extent that's possible. This is one where, I feel like I'm willing to compromise. I think that getting to 9 is important. While I am concerned about the council being, holding and looking at the big picture, I think there's part of that is a leadership issue. It's the mayor and the at-large representatives, kind of that's their, I think if I putting myself in their position, I would view that as kind of my role, was trying to bring the entire council around to focusing on the big picture, even though it's appropriate and certainly important for district representatives to look at local issues. But I think if, leadership also requires that those views have to fit in a bigger picture. And I think with, maintaining the 3 elected officials that are elected by the city as a whole, that's enough to, make sure the big picture stays in focus, so to speak. And it does come down to leadership. We elect, if we elect poor leaders, they might not be able to project that picture, so to speak, to the rest of the council and bring them around. And maybe if that happens, those folks don't need to be the leading that charge. I see Diana's entering. I'm going to go ahead and let her in. So I think leadership can address the big picture issue. I think that there is certainly a perception out there that council needs to be a little bit closer to the people, so to speak, and adding a district representative will do that. I wouldn't support getting, and I think the group hadn't really discussed it. I think after we kind of focused on 9, I think going any larger risks drawing a lot of attention from the manager and the professional staff to do their job, because each council member, draws some time from the manager's office. And, some council members are more interested in engaging with the manager and the other professional staff members. And Councilor Weeks, I think you've seen that. Some counselors want to spend a lot of time with the staff, and others defer to the staff more and don't take as much time. But if we add, if we approach 10, 11, 12 members, that adds potentially a significant amount of time that's going to be taken away from the professional staff to do their job. And so I have that concern that if we get too large, it's just unwieldy. Harvey, yeah.
Well, I definitely don't want to see it grow any larger than 9. I'm in agreement with you on that part. I'm just still not. I'll just, like I said, whatever the majority, thinks we should do, whether it be adding a new district seat or an at-large, I'll get on board with. But I don't have an opinion right now as to what would be my major focus, if that makes any sense.
Sure. I think several of us, I think that's kind of consistent with Robbie. He's not, at least what he said, and I'm a little bit the same way, not wedded to one approach or another so strongly that we're not able to compromise to get where we need to be. So, but I appreciate, that your perspective, and it is hard to tell what the right answer is. I mean, this is not, there's no science to this. There's no right answer to it. It's what, we as a group feel is in the best interest of the community and that's our recommendation to council. And then they're going to have to decide, obviously, for themselves, what to do. So Harvey, go ahead. You had your hand raised. You're on mute. You're still on mute.
There we
Well,
go. Ashton was trying to get unmuted, and so was Diana.
Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you all. I am here. Sorry, I've been trying to chime in
Oh,
various places, but struggling a little bit. But I guess, I'm enjoying and appreciating the different sides of the argument. What I would like to hear more from, if we could, for those people who do feel strongly about a district level representative, is I've heard the arguments for it. I guess, what are the arguments, if there are any, against an at-large seat? Are we concerned that there won't be adequate access, or that that's too much responsibility for one additional person? I just would love to hear a little bit more about what the thinking is there for those people who have strong opinions.
Councilor Weeks?
Yes, I will try to give a little point on that. Being on the city council before, I think when you talk about at large, sometimes I perceive, this is me talking only, that the at-large people lost their concentration on other citizens in the city of Raleigh. And when we saw our representative from our district more and less of the at-large, I feel that representation is very important when we talk about increase it by district and not by at-large. This is my view only, but I saw this myself as being on the city council, and I've seen it since being off the city council. And that's why I'm strongly for another district representation. And at the same time, I think Robbie hit it very good. Representation of the citizens of Raleigh. You saw the growth, you see the population and different things that's going on in District C. And not only District C, Eric hit it on it earlier, but he talked about E, but don't forget District C and B connects together. And we also have the downtown area. We C and another district is involved. Then you have District B, which is also involved with that. And that's why I'm stronger for a district representation instead of at large.
Thank you. Let's hear from Diana. She just joined. So Diana, we are talking about, it sounds like we're in agreement to 9. It sounds like the majority of folks, though some of us, and I was one of the ones that had initially been leaning towards adding an at-large position. My concern, and I think it's true of the folks that were feeling this way, and I'll let them jump in, of course, was the idea that we want, I want to make sure that the council really is focused on the future and the big picture and not get tied up into hyper local issues to where there's a lot of division on council. But I have heard from the community, and we are growing. And I think this goes to Councilor Weeks' point. Adding a district member, dilutes the number of people that each district representative, or reduces the number of people in the district, not by a lot, but it does. And even if it doesn't materially change it, there's a perception, I think, that folks, will have a representative and they'll be closer to the representative and they'll get better representation. I don't know that I necessarily think that's a definite outcome because we're growing so fast, but in the interest of, compromise and moving this forward, I think I'm okay with, going with the district position. So Diana, that's kind of the summary of what folks have been talking about. And so how do you feel, and what do you want to add to the conversation?
Okay, thank you. I am in agreement with, I can go with the 9 representatives. As far as the at-large and the district, I've been thinking about it and thinking about how District C is growing. It has grown and it's going to continue to grow. And we know that one representative cannot handle all the issues that happens in District C. We know that for a fact. I know that for a fact. The community knows that for a fact. If we could get another District C representative, I'm all for that. But if I go with the majority, if the at-large will work, but it seems like there will be a lot more responsibility on that person. But I'm strongly with adding the other District C representative, if that makes sense.
Well, it does. The only thing I want to point out, and the city attorney can certainly weigh in, the districts have to be roughly equal in terms of population. So depending on how they draw the districts, that could result in, dividing the area covered by District C. But I don't think council you can't just drop another representative into District C. And so, by definition, dividing up the city with 6 ways instead of 5 ways will reduce, the population covered by, in theory, District C. But there's no direct way to add a representative to that geographic area. But by adding a member and dividing the city, you are going to reduce the number of people in each district to some extent, which then allows, however District C lines up, there'll be fewer people in that district, but theoretically the people that end up in another district are going to be closer to that representative. If that makes sense, Diane. I don't know if I'm articulating that clearly, but is that kind of, Robin, is that consistent with, am I accurate in that?
Yeah, that would dilute the vote of other voters, some of the voters. So you couldn't do that. I mean,
you can't target one district because you
can't. And I keep mishearing there's District C and C. So trying to hear what everybody's saying. But when they redraw there are some principles, generally recognized principles of how districts are redrawn. And I think those are the ones that, will guide council, and some of those have gotten out of whack over the last 10 years, like talking about downtown being split. And so I don't know what council will do, but this will be the opportunity to move some things around and, maybe combine neighborhoods that weren't, but every time you move one thing, you got to move another, and it's pretty complicated, but you can't put 2 in one. And to add another district, you'd have to basically, I think we talked about this, recombine and subdivide, which would probably be a pretty big task to do before, this particular redistricting, although it could be done at some later date if in fact they voted to add another seat.
So I have some additional reasons for why I favor a district seat over an at-large, and why I think there are certain advantages to a district seat. So in addition to the representational issues that have been raised so far, there's a really big practical problem with the cost and the threshold for running when we're talking about, especially if we're wanting to increase the potential for non-traditional candidates to get onto council and represent their communities. The cost of running an at-large seat is much higher than the cost of running for a district seat. And the costs of running are going to explode now that the city council seats are going to be in the exact same cycle as federal elections. So if we're wanting to at least maintain the opportunity for council to have non-traditional candidates, candidates of color, younger candidates, candidates from varied socioeconomic backgrounds, I think that one of the ways to do that, because we can't create, we're not creating, it's not college. We can't have demographic based seats that are held for different groups of people or different interests. What we can do is we can try to make sure that the entry level requirements for making a real and a viable candidacy are lower. And for me, that means adding a district, not adding an at-large, because the at-larges are going to become more and more, most likely they're going to become more and more nationalized. They're going to become more and more partisan, even though they're technically not. And they're definitely going to become expensive. So that for me is a really big kind of practical value that leads me to prefer a district seat.
Yeah, thanks for all the input. And Catherine, to that end, that's been the thing to my mind that's been the most influential for me to consider why a district would be the better option. I guess what I'm having a hard time with mentally is balancing my concern of creating more divisiveness, more neighborhood oriented sort of infighting. Does that feel like I'm making too big of a concern out of that? I mean, do we think that there's not as much of a risk there, or that the opportunity for more people to be involved outweighs that risk?
Yeah, for me personally, and I totally hear you on that. I think unfortunately, and I don't know that this is a controversial statement, but I think we're living in pretty divisive times. People are finding ways to group themselves according to any particular affiliation that's on the table. And yeah, neighborhoods and communities are probably going to be one of those things. I don't know that we fix that with an at-large seat, because I think people will still try to sort themselves and organize themselves into, you know, are you NIMBY or are you YIMBY, right? Are you pro-growth or are you anti-growth? Those, we've already seen those divisive patterns play out. And I don't know that there's any structural way we can guarantee that it won't continue or worsen. I think there are cultural influences at play that are a little bit bigger than any one particular structural approach to governance. But which is why, like, yeah, I don't think you're overblowing that concern. I also have it. My hope is that the team of people that Raleigh continues to elect, whether they're at large or whether they're district representatives, will work for the betterment of Raleigh. And I think that goes to Eric's earlier point, where at the end of the day, these are leadership questions, and these are questions about the relationship between the electorate and their leaders, of what kind of person do we want, in addition to what outcome are we hoping for in any given cycle. So that's pretty much a non-answer
really
to your question, but I agree with you.
No, but I appreciate it. And I appreciate hearing all the perspectives and different bits of input around this. And so I do think I am in alignment with the group on 9 and a district level. And to add another point to that, I think one of the charges of this committee is to find ways to drive engagement, and whether that is not just explicitly through voters or whether it is through increased candidacy. I do think that there's a much larger opportunity to drive increased participation at a district level than we're going to see at an at-large level. So I think that is another kind of push to move it forward in terms of accomplishing the goals of this committee as well.
Do others want to weigh in on that, Ashton's question?
I don't want to weigh in on Ashton's question, but I do want to state that because of the conversation that was just had, I'm now in favor of district.
Okay, well, that's why we're having, that's happened several times. That's why we're having these conversations. And I'm glad that people are open-minded and listening to one another. I think, for anything else, I appreciate how everybody has conducted themselves and have been honest and open and willing to listen. And I think we've learned from each other and, and continue to do that. I have the concern about the divisiveness. It's been, I've seen it get more divisive over time. My time in and around the city, it's been divisive even on some of the appointed boards. I don't know that, I don't know how this will, nobody knows how this will ultimately shake out, but I think that, I would be more concerned if the number of district representatives was going to be, I don't think it will become an overwhelming number that the hyper local concerns will outweigh the broader picture for the elected officials. But we're going to keep growing. Even if we add a district within a couple years, there are going to be just as many people, in the new districts as there are in the old districts, and it's going to keep going. And so again, it really comes down to who we elect as leaders. But I like the idea of lowering the bar a little bit, to giving some people, more people the opportunity to potentially get elected. But if anybody that says they know how this all shakes out is just not being honest. So I think we just have to, do the best we can. Ashton, your hand is up. I assume that you want to add.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, into exactly what you just said, I've appreciated the entire time the humility of this group as well, that no one thinks we have all the answers. But, if the group were in alignment, maybe thinking, including in the report, I know part of our report is to recommend that council revisit this kind of step every couple of years, pay especially as a part of that. And so maybe that's a piece of it too, is to think about, do we recommend that there's a periodic look at whether another seat needs to be added, and maybe it's, we alternate between it, or just that being some part of the recommendation that we acknowledge that this may not be the permanent solution for Raleigh. Adding one more district level seat may not be the last fix we need to make, and that we encourage them to continue to look at this in the future.
That's certainly something we can do, because obviously the census drives the redistricting, every 10 years, but it is solely within the council's prerogative to adjust the size of council. They can, I think the only thing they have to do is, once they make a change, it has to be in place for, I think, 2 election cycles. There is something in the statute. You can't go flip-flopping every election. There is some requirement that you have to stay with the kind of the horse you rode in on for at least a little while. But beyond that, there are, council can adjust it up to the 12 max, and they can reduce it. I think I've mentioned before, Durham was at 11 maybe, and they reduced theirs to 7 at some point 10 or 12 years ago. I don't know the history of it, but I know they did that. So, there's certainly nothing wrong with, if the group wants to put something in there similar to what we did about the compensation that looks at if the city, that may give Robin an aneurysm, but if the city continues to grow, maybe, council should consider looking at, Harvey's raising his hand, every 10 years to reevaluate the size too at the census. That's probably that may be the right approach, is, when they have to redistrict because of the census, they ought to also take a look at the size and make sure that the size and the composition reflects what the community needs and wants at the time, because it may change over time. 10 years may be the right time, because if we go to 4-year staggered terms, that's, just over 2 election cycles, at least full terms for those council members. I think that if they make this change, if they add the district and we change to 4-year staggered terms, I think it would be smart for council to let that kind of marinate for several cycles to see how it works. And because I think partly my hope with the 4-year terms, it will give council more ability to look at the big picture too, because, and I'll just be honest with you, my thinking about that is it does insulate the elected officials a bit from the immediacy of particular decisions. So if council makes a tough decision on something, and it's, and you have 3 years from when you have to run for re-election again versus 6 or 8 months, I think it gives council the ability to, have a bit more of a backbone and make what the right decision and not necessarily the politically correct decision. Sometimes those decisions align, but they don't always align. And if we, creating some space between the elections for each council member, my hope is it does allow them to take a step back and kind of look at the big picture and what's right for the city in general, and not necessarily be as influenced by the immediacy of a particular decision they've made, if that makes sense. Harvey?
Eric, I would agree with you on the fact that the 4-year term gives an opportunity for a longer term look. I was just, as we were having this conversation, reflecting my 20-some years in watching councils in action. I don't recall circumstances where the at-large were on one end of the pole and the districts were at the other end of the pole. There's always been some sort of mixture there, so that I don't know that the adding a district in any way impairs our ability to long-term think, given the fact that we're giving them 4 years and they don't all have to be pressured by some hot button issue every time the door swings open. So, I mean, I think Ashton makes a good point. Frankly, it would be great from a management perspective to have everybody at large and everybody thinking long-term. But the reality is that there are very individual constituencies out there that can get aggrieved unless there's a representative process to circulate that to some degree. They're going to get trampled on or lost in translation, and that's not a good outcome either. So I got comfortable with adding the district, feeling that it would not compromise the council's ability to think long-term.
And my, going into this, my hope and what I had been asking for since 2010, I think 2010, when I started circulating emails to council, was 4-year staggered terms, because I think that's the most critical thing that will give council the ability to have a longer time horizon for their decision making. Right now, my personal opinion, 2 years, everybody up at the same time, really doesn't allow council, or at least it mitigates against council taking the longer term. It just simply, they have more pressure to address the immediate concerns of neighbors over very immediate issues versus, the long-term investing in, public infrastructure and things like that are, might take a tax increase, but it simply has to be done. And so that's my view. I think the 4-year staggered terms addresses the strategic thinking component that I'm concerned about. And I think if we were just talking about adding a council member and keeping 2-year terms, I can tell you that this would be a red line for me. I would say that we got to add a at-large member because that's the only way we're going to get people thinking strategically and long-term. But because we are also recommending 4-year staggered terms, I'm more comfortable with the idea of adding a district, because I think these other factors will help the strategic long-term thinking. So that's probably more than anybody wanted to hear, but that's kind of how I'm approaching it. Others, because I think we're going to, please, I don't want to shut anybody out. But and today we don't have to decide it completely, but I would like to, it seems to me, and I'm just going to say it, it seems to me that we have reached, and I'm not going to hold you to it because we're not there yet, but it seems to me that we've reached consensus that adding a district representative and going to 9 members fits kind of within the overall approach we've taken, and that we can go to council right now with a consensus on that. I don't hear anybody disagreeing with that. If, again, this isn't the final, I've always said I'm not going to hold people to things. I want them to think about it, and we're all continue to be open, but we do have to draw to a close at some point, and that leads us kind of to the next. Unless people have additional thoughts on this, it leads us to the next agenda item, which is scheduling, kind of final scheduling and the content of the report. I'm going to ask Rob, and I think that council comes back the second meeting in August. Is that their next meeting?
The 17th.
Okay, so that's their second. So they're skipping their first meeting of August. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
So ideally, I would like to think that we could finish. Our next meeting would be, let's see, today's the 28th. Our next meeting would be August 11th. And you said council would be, that's 17th. So I don't think that's realistic, but I think we could get, I'm pretty confident we could get our final report to council the first meeting in September. Does that seem reasonable? That would allow us two more meetings, and we can always schedule an additional one where, we can schedule a special meeting if we need to, but I think we can do that. And what I would like to do is the next meeting, we can kind of revisit all of our recommendations. I'd be reluctant to change anything from the stuff we already presented to council, but obviously I think we presented those as final recommendations. And then the additional recommendations we can kind of go over. I've already started kind of revising the report, but I wanted your thoughts on the content of the report. Harvey, go ahead. See your hand up.
Yeah, so I don't sense lingering heartburn on any of the issues we've discussed. So we have the interim report. We've agreed on that. So that's 2/3 of our business. The last third is what we've been talking about the last 2.5, 3 meetings. And I think you could begin to put that in the context of a draft document for us to look at our next meeting, and that we should be relatively close to closure here unless any of the participants, and there's only one participant missing today.
Yep.
And I don't think Justin's going to have, I don't sense he's got heartburn with where we're going.
Yeah.
So I think you could start moving towards closing case. We could review that at the next meeting, and if we need to come back and revisit it, we could do it in the meeting on would be the 25th of August. Otherwise, I think we're moving to the short rows here.
Well, I've started kind of the outline of the draft because we had roughly the recommendations in terms of voter engagement, and we had agreed, it seemed to me, on the number, the 9. And so I've started a draft, I guess, format wise. My thinking is we stay kind of roughly with what we did with the interim report. We might want to include an appendix that has links to, all the other documents, but I was told by staff, I think that, putting everything in one big document wasn't the approach they wanted to take, because everything is warehoused electronically now. And so, either in the interim report, I included hot links to the other documents. We can do the same thing, and all the meetings are going to be uploaded to YouTube, the city's YouTube channel. And so my thinking is, and I'm asking for guidance, is to, wherever it's appropriate, include links to related documents. We can, I think that this Excel spreadsheet is up, but we can load that again to make sure it's in board docs, and keep a similar format to what I did with the interim report, add the additional context and information, and circulate it for comment by the group, and go from there. Does that, or are there things that you think format wise we should change from how we did the interim report? I didn't hear any negative feedback from council or anyone for what that's worth, but I'm certainly open to other suggestions. But if you make it too complicated, that means you're going to have to help me in terms of formatting, because I'm not I'm not a master of Word and hot links and charts. So I only say that if you're going to make complicated recommendations, you're going to get drafted into helping do the formatting and getting it set up right. So that's my only warning to folks before you make your additional recommendations. So fire away. I got my pen ready to go. And if you want to take a look at the interim report and just see if there are things in there, I did try to beef up a little bit of the rationale in a couple places. But again, you know, if you want to take a look at the interim report and if you have suggestions or things you think that I didn't touch on enough, or I should maybe shift the approach around some, let me know. But I did try to add a little bit more context under a couple of the paragraphs for rationale, but everybody will see that and can comment accordingly.
Eric, if I might, in the report, and I haven't seen your updated version.
No one has.
So when we talk about the increase in total compensation for the mayor and city council, some sort of distinction between the at-large crowd, the mayor council and mayor manager form, and the fact that we were sort of mayor manager focused, and that and I sense from council some feedback to us that they thought there should, you know, actually when we talked about $45,000, I think a couple of them were looking for more than that. But, you know, part of our rationale was we wanted to move to a better spot. We didn't want to turn it into a full-time position, and we wanted to be sort of in context with our neighbors in the state. So I had marked that as a feel for why we didn't think that they should be compensated at a six-figure level, because we were trying to maintain the integrity of the council manager form of government.
And I think too, to be somewhat in alignment with the, you know, from a purely political perspective, you know, if I was in their shoes and they're getting ready to vote for, you know, what will be a substantial increase from where they are today, you know, people that are looking to make political hay, you know, it's not too hard to go look at the largest cities in the state and see where we fall relative to that. And if I'm on council, you know, I don't necessarily want to be trying to propose a compensation package that's 2 or 3 times bigger than the largest compensation package of any city or county in North Carolina. So, you know, that was part of my thinking, you know, in getting them where our recommendation was. But I agree with you that it doesn't hurt to say, you know, in the mayor council format, you know, councilors are compensated at a higher rate because fundamentally it is more of a full-time position, because the mayor is the chief executive officer and the council members typically act as department heads in that form of government. And it's also just not common. I don't know that there's a couple of small towns have it, but you know, large cities in North Carolina, just they don't operate that way. So I'll put something in there to address that issue. Do others have points they think I should try to make or refine in any way? And obviously, if you think of something, you can let me know outside the meeting as well. Again, the draft, everybody will see the draft, so it's we'll vote on the final version, and you know, before we bring it to council. So, well, today you all have not been quite as active, which is okay, except Harvey. He's bending my ear today, but that's okay.
One other thing,
Yep.
While the council wants it simple, I do think including the data bank that we have as an appendix is useful for anybody else that might want to pick this up that hasn't been a party to this dialogue in any kind of, proximity. So, I mean, I just think it would be, it'd also be helpful to council to take a look at what's going on elsewhere.
I think that the only reason I am perfectly fine with that, I'm not arguing against it. The only thing is if you attach it like a PDF, it's really unwieldy. So I think what I want to do is make sure that the staff can put it somewhere, so that the hot link goes directly to it, because it's set up, it's so long that it's really not readable for anybody that's over 35 probably, because their vision isn't going to be able to read it. So we can physically attach it, but I think it's most useful if we can also do a hot link, because the way my wife got it set up, she can do these. When you move across the columns, it drags the local jurisdictions with it, and it's just much easier to read and figure out. So if I can figure out how to put the hard copy with it, that's fine. But I'll also make sure that we can get it housed somewhere so that if somebody's looking at it electronically, they can just hit the hot link and get right to it in the most usable fashion as well. So anyone else? Well, I'll endeavor to get this thing. Like I said, I've kind of started it. I'll endeavor to get it out so folks can review it and we can talk about it on the 11th. And then the goal will be to do the final polishing and approve it on the 25th and present it to council. That's obviously their discretion, but Robin, if you can suggest that we be ready the first meeting in September, if they're open to that, or
yeah, whenever, that's good.
Okay, so that's the goal. I will do my best to get it in everybody's hands, and so you all have time to review it, and we can move it forward. So with that, and are there any other comments, suggestions? And if you think of something after, please don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call me or shoot me an email. I want everybody to be on board and comfortable with all of this. So, but otherwise, thanks again for everybody's input, and we will see you on the 11th.
Thanks, Eric.
Bye-bye.